Hello world, welcome back to my channel. This is the second video of my Webflow Bootcamp series. Today, we're going to be diving into the basics of Webflow. Let me walk you through the different parts of the interface. On your left, you will have a toolbar and panels. I'm going to refer to this as your left toolbar and your left panels. We'll be talking mainly about the Add panel, signified by a little plus icon, the Navigator, which is these three different lines, and the Assets panel. The middle of our interface, the main bulk of our screen, is going to be our canvas. On the top right, you'll see something that looks like a play button. That's going to be our preview button. It'll help us view our website in real time. And finally, we have our right panels, style, settings, and interactions. All of these will make a lot more sense when we're actually working and we have elements down on our canvas. So what are elements? Elements are pieces that make up a web page, like Lego blocks. From the Add panel, we can drag elements onto the canvas. So let's talk about some of the different elements that we can see on our page. First off, we have headings. So what are headings? Headings help us make titles and other important parts of our website. They come in many different sizes, starting at H1 and going all the way down to H4. Here I am on a blank site. I'm going to go to my Add panel and drag in a heading element that's underneath this typography section. Now, as you can see, we have a bunch of different heading size options. Now, each of these has a different level of significance to the browser, with your H1 being the most significant and your H6 being the least significant. So when we're picking our heading settings, we need to be mindful. Think of a heading 1 as being a book's title, while the heading 2 might be a chapter title, heading 3 a section, and a heading 4 a subsection. We usually only go up to H4. Just like our example page, I'm going to add some text to my heading and say something like this. Feel free to add any sort of text to your web page. Next, let's talk about paragraphs. When we write a lot of text, we use paragraphs to help keep them neat. Let's use a paragraph on our site. Again, I'm going to go into my Add panel and drag out a paragraph element and place it right here under my heading. Now, as you can see, Webflow generates some default text for us. For the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and keep that same text. We can also add another heading describing our location. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my Add panel, again, drag out that heading. I'm going to place it right above my H1, and instead of making it an H1, I'll make it maybe an H3. So this I can say, okay, New Jersey. So this adds 3 different elements onto our page. Now before we begin styling, let's add one final element to our page, and that element is going to be an image. Navigate to the Assets panel on your left toolbar, and you can upload an image. As you can see, I already have one uploaded. And what you're going to do once you have that image, and just drag out the image. Now this is our unstyled only content page. And our challenge is going to be to make it look something similar to this. To change the font settings of a particular piece of text, we can navigate to that text and scroll through our style panel on the right until we reach the typography section. Again, there's an option here for font, and you can go ahead and pick the font that you'd like. Now, I want to apply the same font to every single piece of text on my web page, and there's a really easy way to do that. In web design, styles cascade down to a parent element's children. Let me simplify that really quickly. An element can be a parent and can have many children. In our case, we only have one parent element, and that parent element is the body. The body is the parent element. It's kind of like a grouping that's going to hold all your other elements on your page. Now, the body being the parent has many children. So these two headings, this paragraph, this image, they're all siblings to each other, but children to the parent that is the body. Whatever styles that we apply on the body cascade down to the rest of the elements, to the rest of the children, unless the children have a different style specified. Let me show you what I mean. So for example, for this body, I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna change this font, and I'm gonna make it System UI. And I'll change this color as well. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna click and make it black. As you can see, this has changed the styling of all of the elements on our page, all of the text elements on our page. Now, if I really wanted my heading 1 to be red instead of black, then I could go ahead and do that. So I'd click on the heading 1 and I'd go here to color and I would be able to change it. Now this isn't affecting any of the other parent elements. Now this isn't affecting any of the other children elements. It's only affecting itself, and it's overriding the default styles that was passed down to it from its parent, the body. However, the colors that I want to use for this web page are a little bit different. My background is going to be this light purplish pink, and the color of my text will be a darker violet. You can go ahead and grab that body element and just paste in the color values, the hex values, into that same color. There we go. We can also adjust the boldness of our text. That option is controlled by the font weight property. Now, as you can see, the font that I chose, System UI, comes with a bunch of different weight options. Now, I like this bold option for this big heading, but I think for the location one, I might go ahead and change it to be something a little bit lighter. Yeah, like 500, I feel like that suits it. Now, if you haven't noticed yet, the lower the number, the thinner it is, and the bigger the number, the thicker it is. So that's font and font weight. In web design, the unit most commonly used for size is called pixels, abbreviated PX. Now in Webflow, if you click on the icon for pixels right here, you'll see a drop down with all these other unit options. Now this is a little bit more of an advanced topic, and I'd love to make a video about it where I go in depth and really talk about when we would use each and every single one of these units. So let me know if you'd like to hear that. But yeah, so for the sake of this tutorial, we're just gonna stick to pixels. Now, the size of this heading right now is at 24 pixels. If I wanted to make it a little bit smaller, which I kind of do, so I'll bring it down to maybe 18. And then we also have this other property for height, and this defines the line height of our text. So that means the vertical height of our text in terms of how much space it's taking up. As you can see, right now there's a lot of different white space that's this bounding box, this blue box, there's a lot of space between that and the edges of our text. So if I were to bring this down to, let's say 18, you can see that the text kind of squishes down. So I'm gonna leave it to that right now. Okay, so that's good for me. I'm gonna bring up the size of this heading, however, maybe I'll make it something like 55, and I'll up the heading height accordingly as well. And I think I'll do the same for this text. Okay, great. Actually, maybe let's make that a bit bigger. 18. And then I'll just up that line height because I really want to give more space between my different lines. So maybe I'll make it 24 instead, 30 even. Okay, perfect. Now we have our general text layouts done. The final thing I want to talk about, now we have our general text styling done and basic body styling done. The next thing that I'd like to talk about is padding and margin. These two things are essential to web design. So let's talk a little bit more about what padding and margin actually are. Imagine a picture frame. Imagine a photo inside of a picture frame. So for example, this cat right here, this picture of this cat right here, that's gonna be our element. So it could be anything like a heading, a paragraph, a button, whatever. the actual content of that element is held in this, imagine it as being this cat. Now, the black sort of bounding that you see around it, that's going to be the border. Think about it like that. That's going to be like the border of this element. Now, the white stuff between the picture itself and the border, that's our padding. Padding is always inside. Padding is always between the element itself and its border. But margin, however, margin would define the space around the outside of the picture frame. So if you had a bunch of picture frames next to each other, margin would define the space between the outsides of the picture frame in relation to the other picture frames. To visualize it more, let's go through an example. If we look at our text right now, I feel like it's all really squished together. I want to give my big heading some more space on the bottom, just like we have over here, some more space on the bottom, and maybe a little bit more on the top as well. So how do we change that? If we scroll all the way up in our style panel and we select our heading, in the spacing option, we see we have two different things. We have margin and we have padding. So if we were to change the margin, we could bring that up to, let's say, 30 pixels. So that would give us some more space from the top. Again, we can adjust and see what works best. I think 25 is fine. And from the bottom, I'll go ahead and give it a margin of 20. So this spacing looks good to me for right now. We'll talk more in depth about margin and padding, especially when we get to buttons, but that will be in the next video. In this one, I really just want to focus on building a heading, a paragraph, and an image on the right. So let's talk about how we would achieve this image on the right. If we wanted to achieve the image on the right, we would do it using flexbox and grid and using layouts. So what are layouts? Layouts are how the different parts of a web page are arranged. Just like how you would organize toys or photos in a photo album, we can arrange things on a web page to make it look nice and easy to use. Now, why do we need layouts? Here's an example of a page that I designed without a defined layout and with a defined layout. You can clearly tell the difference and see how much more organized and how much more clear the web page looks with a defined layout. For today's purposes, we'll be focusing on flexbox. So what is flexbox? Flexbox lines up items in a row or stacks them in a column. It helps organize content in one direction and one direction only. Now, how does flexbox work? It uses a div block, again, it uses a div block that serves as a parent. Just like we were talking about the body being the parent to control its elements, being the children, we're going to add our very own sort of grouping that isn't just the body called a div block. It'll make more sense when I show you in a second, but basically we're going to use that div block as a parent so that it can control its children and we're going to apply that layout on the parent so it can affect the children. There are a couple things that I want to group together. We can look at our final site really quickly so that we get a good idea of what we want. I want my heading, my two headings, and my paragraph in one grouping on the left, and I want my image on another grouping in the right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make two separate div blocks or groups for each of those. So here's how we would achieve that. I'm going to go to my Add Elements panel, and right here in Basic, you should see a div block grouping. Now, if you add it to the page, you're not going to notice any real difference. But the magic happens when we apply that layout. But first, let's go ahead and drag all of our elements that we want to be in that specific grouping, that grouping of, heading, and paragraph into one div block, and then that image into another div block. So I'm going to drag, so this is my heading, it's going to go in here. Another heading gonna go right there, and my final paragraph. Now, nothing looks like it changed, but there is that grouping sort of being done. So that's one div block. I'm gonna hit the arrow next to this so that it just minimizes, and I'll go ahead and I'll drag out another div block and put my image inside of this one. So now we have two, and these two are separated, right? And while these elements have a parent, these two div blocks, they need a parent to control their layout. Because remember, we have one div block that has heading, and paragraph, and we have another div block that has the image. We want those two separate div blocks to be governed by another parent that splits them apart and has them in this layout going from left to right using flexbox. So how are we gonna set that up? Well, we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna drag out another div block, and I'm gonna add these two elements inside of here. Now, as we start adding different styles to our these div blocks, you can see that they all sort of have the same name. And this can get confusing really quickly because when we start adding styles, so let's say, okay, I apply flex to this one, as you can see that already has enough. No. So what we use in order to maintain more clean, reusable code is we use something called classes. In Webflow, it's really easy to set up classes for your elements. Classes sort of serve as like roles for your elements, so you can reuse those roles and apply them to other parts of your page. So for example, if I were to have a paragraph here, as you can see, Webflow by default applied a class. Your classes are going to be in this sort of corner of your page. It default applies one for you, right? So I have this paragraph class. Let's say I make it like 20 pixels. If I go ahead and I grab another paragraph and I say, okay, so this is my second paragraph. Now, as you can see, it's not the same as this first paragraph, right? So I make this one red, let's say, let's say I make this one red. Those styles, they aren't being applied to all the paragraphs, even if I wanted to. And as you can see right here, it says paragraph 2 instead, so that's another different class that gets applied, which is why what we want to maintain continuity and to be able to reuse different parts of our text throughout our web page, what we're gonna do is we're gonna define classes so that we know. Now in this case, if I just click on this arrow here and hit remove class, and I go ahead and I type in paragraph here, which matches this original thing, whatever I change to one will change the other. And this will really help us maintain continuity. Okay, but that's my little rant on classes. We're gonna use them now though. So I'm gonna grab this parent div block that's holding both my text and my image, and I'm gonna call this parent. You can name it whatever, but that just helps make it easier. And this div block that's holding the text, I'm just gonna call it text. And the div block that's holding the image, I can call it image wrapper. It's really easy in Webflow. You're gonna find your element, your parent element, make sure that's clicked, and underneath layout, where it says display, you're gonna switch from block to flex. And automatically you should see something that looks like this. Now our flex layout has been successfully applied. I want to leave some space between my text and my image because right now they're right up against each other and I don't really like that. So how I'm gonna do that is I'm gonna go to my flex, again my parent, and underneath this flex settings, a bunch of new different options have opened up. And here where it says gap, I'm gonna go, okay, so right now it's 0 pixels, but maybe I'll make it 20 pixels. So that becomes our gap. Now, our next step would be to create the rounded corners like we have on this image. So we're gonna grab this image wrapper, and the first thing that we're gonna do is give it a width. So let me say 400 pixels, maybe. And even if we keep increasing the size on this image, it's just not getting that big. Because 1,000 pixels in theory would take up a lot of our screen, but it's just not. And that's because of some default flex settings that get applied. And how we're gonna override those flex settings is by going up here, and next to sizing, we're gonna hit this little X that says don't shrink or grow, because by default, flex is gonna try to shrink to fit the text and everything into one space, but we don't want that. So 1,000 might be too big. Let's go for something smaller, something like 300. Let's say 400. Okay, looks good. Now our text is all pushed up to the top, and if I wanted to bring it all to the middle and have it all be center aligned, how I could do that is by going again to my parent, and here next to alignment settings, you can pick a different Y alignment. So I'm gonna go ahead and pick center, just like that. And again, you can play around with the settings. We're gonna grab this image and we're gonna go down to radius and we're gonna hit 50%. That should give us our rounded corners. Now the final touch that we can add to our web page is give it some padding. Now, like I said, padding is gonna give us that space on the inside, and we sort of wanna give it some buffer, like room between the edge of the screen and our text and our image. So we're gonna do that using padding. So it's really simple. We're gonna grab our body and we're gonna add some padding. So I'm gonna add some padding over here. Let's say maybe 100 pixels. Maybe that might be too much. Let's do 60 and 60, and we can do some from the top too. I can do like 120 pixels perhaps, and then same from the bottom. Perfect. And I'll make the height of this text a little bit bigger, 27, and add, make this one a little bigger as well. And this one as well. So this is our bare bones Webflow page. We created this using some very basic structure tools, some very basic styling, and some very basic layout tools. Now this is just the starting point. From here, we're gonna add a lot more complex styling, a lot more complex elements. We're gonna talk about lists and buttons in a future video. So this is just the beginning. I just wanted to give you guys an example of how you would start building out a professional website in Webflow. You would add your content, you would add your styling, and you would add your layout. Now, we have a lot more complex stuff to cover in the future, so stay tuned, subscribe to the channel, and I'll be coming out with that soon. See you guys.